Right, this work is called Caravans of Gold. This work primarily focuses on the historical character of Mansa Musa. And for those who don't know, he was the 10th Sultan of the then extremely wealthy African Islamic Mali Empire. At the time of um, Musa's rise to the throne, the Empire was considered to be one of the most powerful and most wealthiest empires in the world. And it also consisted of territory that formerly belonged to the Ghana Empire. Um, and so to start off, in the top left hand corner, we see the word oro. And oro basically means gold in Spanish. I also like the way, once again, like I've explained in some of the other works, I like the way it sounds, um, the way it looks, and the way it sounds. The word, if you were to use letters from the alphabet more as visuals and not as their sounds, to me, visually having the two O's here with the R in the middle, there's just something about it that I found really interesting. So this is just the word gold. Um, and below that, we have two little X's over there, and those are not decorations. They're actually put there for a reason. It's actually the Roman numeral 20, but I've shortened it to symbolize the obsession um, that man has had with metal, and that extends into even like the cheaper forms of it. So stuff like um, gold-plated jewelry or gold-filled jewelry. And so the number 20 is shown because with gold-filled jewelry, I've done some research. Um, Legally, you're required to have, I think, 5% or 1/20th of gold by weight. And this 5% is described as the carat of the gold alloy on the surface. Um, so that is what that 20 really represents, is the really minimal amount of gold that is allowed on gold-plated jewelry. Um, if we move over to the side over here, of course, this is the name of Mansa. Um, I want to quickly just get out of the full view on this image and just show you sort of one of the source images that I was using at the time, which I found online, which is quite interesting. So this comes from a book which is called, not that I have the book, but it was found online, which is called the Catalan Atlas. And it's actually a medieval world map created, I think, in 1370s. I think it was 1375, if I'm not mistaken. And it was described as one of the most important maps of the medieval period in the Catalan language. Um, so it's not really an atlas despite its name, but it's also quite interesting. I would probably encourage people to look up the Catalan atlas. This is but a little snippet of what the book contains. Extremely interesting, covers lots of what the world looked like at that period of time. And yeah, once again, I encourage you to look at that Catalan Atlas, one of the references, and more of this is in in of in some of my other works as well, using the Catalan Atlas as a source material. Um, Going back to our work over here, Caravans of Gold, we look at this area over here, which is Cash for Gold. And Cash for Gold, for me at least, growing up, um, there were always pamphlets being handed out on the streets in Cape Town, um, which always had, this words Cash for Gold, bring in your gold earrings, your gold chains. Um, and so this is something that I am quite familiar with, this sort of pamphlets being handing out. Um, and gold was also, in my community at least, gold was always worn by people of influence. Now, when I say in my community, what I'm talking about is sort of in my neighborhood, there was a lot of gangsterism, and a lot of the older gangsters wore gold chains, and um, they had gold teeth, and really growing up as a young kid, you see this as a symbol of success and as a symbol of wealth. And once again, it ties into the previous paintings that I spoke about, where there's this aspiration for success. When you come from neighborhoods that are riddled with poverty or riddled with gangsterism, and you see that as a form of success, as a way out. And so that cash for gold, it's very interesting because very often you would find almost the secondary market for gold happening right under your nose. I mean, you still see it on the streets of Cape Town today, where it acts almost like a pawn shop where people take gold there, and they are given money in exchange for this. And this is an industry on its own where the gold is then melted down, and that's a completely um, different story on its own. I'm not going to go into depth about that. Um, Another thing about this was even, very often the younger kids would try and mimic this. So they would wear fake gold chains, and this could get you in a lot of trouble, because people would take it as, oh, that's a gold chain. And if you are a young kid, they would try and rob you and take it off you. So that was quite interesting for me as well. And then moving on from cash for gold, we see the words Persian silk. And Persian silk over here, let me just quickly go into that. Yeah, Persian silk um, is really, once again, refers to the wealth of Mansa Musa. Um, it was said that he made a pilgrimage to Mecca between the years of 1324 and 1325. He had a procession of reportedly, I think, 60,000 men, and all of them were wearing Persian silk, including 12,000 slaves. So I just thought that to be very extravagant, this idea of marching all the way in a procession of 60,000 men, um, and they are wearing Persian silk. Um, and at the bottom of that, we have over here a picture of King Leopold the second of Belgium, and he appears quite a lot in my paintings. His head is floated in this crest, and over here we see the numbers 27. And 27 is really making reference to the numbers gangs in the prison systems in South Africa. There are three main gangs, and so they are the 26s, the 27s, and the 28s. I'm not going to go too much in depth about that, but the 27 gang could be described probably as the hitmen, or men of blood and violence. So I placed this number by King Leopold's head because he was responsible for thousands and thousands of violent deaths in the Congo Free State, and not a lot of people are aware of this. Even people who are coming from Belgium, I've got a few friends who are from Belgium, and they are completely unaware of the history of King Leopold in the Congo Free State, and what the repercussions were of colonization there. This links to quite a few of my works, this piece. Um, so it's quite interesting, and I will link to this work again in another piece that I'll talk about. All right, and so moving down, we see over here the words bread and brandy, and what the bread and brandy is referring to here is it was a form of payment, really. And this is referencing the time of Khoi translators, specifically to one of my other paintings, which is Kritoa. So what would happen is if slaves did good jobs and certain duties were fulfilled on their side, they would be given payment in bread and brandy, and other so-called luxury goods. Below bread and brandy is a picture of a snake over here, and the snake really just represents the koi deity, which is called Kachen, who appears in various forms, not only a snake, but found in koi mythology to appear as a praying mantis as well, and an earland. So I placed this in over here. Moving down, further down to the bottom, we see the words again here, which is camels and gold dust. And camels and gold dust, once again, is referring to the wealth of Mansa Musa. Um, he was said to have in this procession on his way to Mecca to make his pilgrimage, to have something like 80 camels, and each of these camels carried around 100 to 130 kilograms of gold dust. And so I just placed that in on the work as well. Moving up to this part over here, we have marine cattle. Marine cattle refers to slave ships and the thousands of slaves aboard those ships, and many of these ships that during the transatlantic slave trade as well died. You know, many ships left the continent of Africa, and they were taken over to North America, or they were taken down the coast of Africa, and many of these slaves just died aboard the ships because the ship sunk, they hit rough waters, they hit storms, and you had thousands and thousands of bodies just just lost forever. And so I use the word marine cattle because these people were just treated as cattle. They had no names, there was no record of them, who they were. They were nothing but a quantity, nothing but a number. And so I put in this word here, marine cattle. Moving down at the bottom here, this is a code that I've created. It says AAA UB49. Some of my works do come up where I'm just using numbers. It refers really to this section over here. I'll give you a very small breakdown, is that it just refers to gambling on street corners, you know, gambling dice games. The PLRK is an abbreviation of a street gang that that was in my neighborhood when I was growing up, and this actually refers to a specific incident that happened regarding the street gang, and I will not go into detail about it as yet, and will probably be featured in one of my future paintings. So moving down here, we see the words Aure Sacra Fames, and yeah, the translation of this is Latin. The translation of this is basically the hunger for gold. Where that actually comes from, I think the book of Timothy, and it comes from Saint Paul. And what it really is, I think the translation in the biblical term is the accursed greed for gold. Yeah, so I found that while doing some research online as well, and I found these words, and I thought it's just fitted in perfectly with this work. And then moving up towards the top area over here, we see some text here in yellow, and you can't sort of make the text out that well, but what it does say here is Stars is back in town. And what that refers to is actually, once again, it's tattoos from South African prisoners who are part of the Numbers gang. Um, and so I suppose the question would be is why is it that we keep on linking between these various sources? Like, what has Mansa Musa got to do with the prison gang of South Africa? And pretty much nothing. But at the same time, if you look at the structure of the prison gangs, it's quite militant, and there are certain ranks in these prison gangs, and so we once again see that there is these forms of power There are foot soldiers, and then there are generals. So there really is a structure to this. It's not like it's just prison gangs that's got absolutely no structure to them, and they abide by very specific codes as well. So I found that in the context of this work, it really does make sense to sort of include narratives that are familiar to me, narratives that come from the community that I've grown up in and that come from South Africa. It's very important that I put in what my experience is and what my truths are. Um, and that's what a lot of the work is about not only referencing historical figures or historical narratives, but also present day things that has happened in my life, or people within my community have experienced that. And so I'll just show you quickly where this actually comes from. Let me just go over to this. So this is the torso, or the upper torso, of one of the numbers gangs. And if you look at this area over here, it says stars in back is back in town. And these prison tattoos are they will they found all over the bodies of inmates, and usually the number will be placed somewhere on their body as well to represent which gang they are from. So I found that quite interesting. And finally, there's a little text here, and this says UV. That's an Easter egg. Will not be giving the information away of that as yet, but this will be part of a future series of work. And then behind his body, over here, you can see there's some text also that pops through, and this is the scrambled text of a poem. And this poem is also about power and greed. And I've scrambled the text according to a way that I can only read it. Um, AU, that is really on the periodic table. So AU is really the periodic table, the reading for gold. And then down here, we have the text which is Man on Fire, and that is Rashad Stahi, who was a crime underground boss in South Africa, who was killed by a vigilante group called Pagat in 1996. And I remember this instance quite a bit because it was quite a big thing that happened in Cape Town at the time. And it's always just stood out for me how the people took the power into their own hands, and the communities that had enough of the dealing of drugs in their areas. And so they actually marched down to this drug merchant's house and they set him alight. It had quite big international news coverage as well. And I think it just fitted quite nicely with the theme once again. So that is it for Caravans of Gold. Thank you for joining me for this digital walkabout, and I will be bringing you more information on the other pieces. Thank you.